My name is Charles Givre. I'm originally from New York. I went to the University of Arizona, got a degree in computer science. I then went to Brandeis, got a degree in Middle Eastern Studies. Following that, I worked in an undisclosed building in Northern Virginia, working as a counterterrorism analyst for 5 years. Sorry, nondescript building in Northern Virginia, working as a counterterrorism analyst for about 5 years. And then I joined Booz Allen Hamilton, where I do various data analytic projects. And for the last 2 years, I've been working on building data science training for Booz Allen. And in my very rare spare time, I fix up British sports cars, I play trombone, and most recently, we just had a baby in May, and that has pretty much destroyed any sleep time and/or spare time that I had. Yeah. Okay. All right. So before I kind of get into the meat of the talk today, I have this stuff that I have to say. So everything that I'm going to talk about today is the result of my own experiments. I don't know if anybody else is or is not doing any of what I'm going to show you. If you decide you want to try all this stuff, this is the do not try this at home. Make sure you try this on your own equipment, because breaking into other people's stuff is a crime. Don't do this on other people's stuff. Yeah. Okay. All right. Enough of that. So the point of this talk is entitled "What does your smart device know about you?" And the basis of this talk is kind of an experiment. And what I tried to do was to do like a mini investigation of what can be gathered about an individual based off from data that is derived from home automation devices. And so, yeah, so that's pretty much kind of sums it up. Now, I imposed a few rules on... Okay. So I start out knowing only that the target of this investigation, they own a Wink hub, and if you're not familiar with all these devices, don't worry, I'll get into what they are. And then also, we're only going to look at data which can be gathered via automatic means. Now, the purpose of this talk is not to evaluate the security or not security of these devices. If you want to do that, go to Black Hat. I'm just kind of assuming that you can get at the data, and I mean, I did get at the data, so I mean, it's theoretically possible. In a way, it's not really a true experiment in that the target is myself, so I know kind of what the picture is supposed to look like. But hopefully you'll see that it's interesting nonetheless. I tried not to cheat and kind of use guilty foreknowledge, but there was one instance where I kind of had to do that. Also, just kind of another caveat, in an effort to maintain some modicum of my own privacy and perhaps dignity, I'm going to show you kind of some data, and then I'll show you I'll say like what you could do with this data. Like you should be able to see how you could do it, but I'm not going to show some of the results just so I could have a little privacy. And then finally, a lot of the ways I'm going to mention also allow you to interact with individual home automation devices. So I'm not going to show you how to mess with people like by blowing up their air conditioners and stuff like that, which theoretically you could do by messing with these APIs. Okay, so no one's running for the door yet, so that's a good sign. So what I kind of gathered as a result of doing this was that these home automation devices, they collect a lot and broadcast a lot of information about their owners, which kind of exceeds what you might expect. And when you start to aggregate this data or collect it over time, it can really reveal a lot about the device's owner. As I mentioned, and the devices typically don't store data locally, like physically on the device. They typically interact with some sort of cloud service, which means that the companies that produce these devices can learn about you, but they can also aggregate all of their customers' data and learn and find interesting patterns in that data. Of course, many of these devices more and more are making the data available via an API or an application programming interface. And this is good news because this means that you can get at it as well, and you can do fun things with it. And here's kind of the real kicker: is that unfortunately a lot of this data is typically just protected by your email address and password. And so, meaning that if you can figure out someone's email address and one of their passwords, and I'm sure no one in this room has used the same password for more than one account, right? Right. Okay. So, if someone hypothetically were to do that, you could just kind of leapfrog from device to device and just keep gathering data about the target. So, okay, all right, so with that in mind, meet your friendly target. Just imagine I'm standing over there. Okay, so we're going to start out, as I mentioned, with the Wink Hub. I'm just curious, how many people know what the Wink Hub is? Okay, cool. How many people work for Wink? Not after last Friday, you don't. Unfortunately, the company that produces this, Quirky, I think they actually went out of business. But the Wink was transferred to another company, and so hopefully they'll keep producing it. It's a really neat device. So what the Wink Hub is it is a hub that that has a lot of different radio transmitters in it that can communicate with home automation devices with a wide range of using a wide range of protocols, including Z-Wave, Bluetooth, Zigbee, Wi-Fi. I think there's a few others. I don't have an exhaustive list, but it's a really neat device because it can talk to all these different things, and you can set up. You could set up like these little scriptlets, if you will, or I think they call them robots. So like if you, for example, you could set something up like if you turn on one light, it can do other things, and it's pretty neat. And it's $50, so if you want to play with it, it's not a huge investment. So it's a really good place to start because from this device we can learn what other devices the target has. It's that central hub that we want to learn about. Now it has a good API which is available. You can read the documentation there. Now, to access the API, you have to request. This API uses Open Authentication, I believe, version 1. To access that, you have to request a set of keys from Wink, and it takes about a week. It took me about a week to get the keys. You don't have to provide any kind of like justification for it. You just ask them, and they send them to you. Or at least that was what they did for me. We'll see if that continues after this talk, but yeah, so, and then there's a few, they have examples on their website if you guys want to play with this. They're in Ruby, but I found a PHP script and a Python script as well that you can just kind of put in your keys and then you can query their API and pull back the data. What else did I want to say about that? I think that's about it. Okay. All right, so the first thing that the Wink will allow you to get, and I thought this was kind of interesting. Oh, no, don't do that, don't do that. It will, if you, when you set up your Wink account, you can link your Facebook, Twitter, other social networking sites to your Wink Hub. I don't really know why you'd want to do this, but if you want to like broadcast to the world that you just turned on your lights and unlocked your door, you can do that apparently with Wink. So, but what you can learn from this is you can get the target's Facebook account and their Twitter handle and any other social networking services they may have chosen to link to their Wink account. Say that 3 times fast. Now, this may seem like obvious if we're assuming that we already know the target's email address, but if the person sets up their Facebook security correctly and or their Twitter correctly, they could conceivably hide their email. So it's 2 additional pieces of information that are potentially very valuable. Okay, so if we start out, we can get there some social networking information from them. Then you can. This isn't about open source intelligence, so I'm not going to go into all the stuff that all the fun stuff you could get with that. But use your imagination. So okay, the next thing that we want to get out of the Wink Hub are what other devices does the target own. Now, of all the different things that I played with, the Wink is probably the best device to get that information because it communicates with so many other different devices. And so the first one, I'm going to introduce the device before we actually start showing you the data that can be gathered from it. This is called the Refuel. It was built by Quirky, and it's this little ring thing right here, and it's a scale that you put under a propane cylinder on a grill, and it tells you how much propane you have left in your grill and will send like alerts to your phone if you're running out of the propane, which really annoyed me, by the way, because I was grilling last Friday and it ran out of propane and did not tell me that alert. But anyway, so that's the Refuel. When you query the Wink, you can just ask it for an exhaustive list of all the devices that are connected to it. So this is just a sample of the Refuel. So now we learned that the target has one of this Refuel devices. Now, when I saw this, I was a little bit floored by this because we have at the top here, you see the device, the model name. Okay, this is kind of like stuff you would expect to see. But this right here kind of blew my mind, that a propane scale would be transmitting lat longs about me. Like I don't know if this was a fluke or what the deal was, but this is what came out of it. And I didn't put all the data from all the other devices that I have talking to the Wink Hub in there, but none of the other devices populated that field. So I don't know what the story is with that. But in any event, we have now coordinates for my home, my zip code, and then we have the MAC address for the device. This is the MAC address for the actual refuel device. So I don't know that really is of any use, but it's there. It's okay. So yeah, these lat longs. When I saw this, I was very curious, and I wanted to see if in fact they were just like the lat longs for like my IP address or something. But nope, that's where I live. And I should also add, if anyone wants to try to mess with me, I actually moved since completing this experiment. So so don't try it, or try it. Have fun. But in any event, that is yeah. So it's okay. So what we've learned from the Wink Hub, we learned my Facebook ID and Twitter handle. We learned what devices we have. So in this case, the Nest Thermostat, the Nest Protect, which is the smoke detector, the propane thing, and the Ring doorbell. And we also learned where I live, and then you can see in that when these devices appear, like it has the added, like there's a field that tells you when they're added. One of the things that I found most interesting was to write scripts that would ping the device periodically, and then you can do change detection and see when a target is adding new devices and or removing devices from their network. It's okay. So then finally, of course, this real refuel thing actually does give you some information that is about grilling. It tells you when you change the propane tank and the weight of it. It actually can give you statistics about how much you grill and how long you grill when you're doing it. And I thought that was, I don't know, it seems kind of silly, but I gave a rehearsal of this presentation to some colleagues of mine at work, and they kind of asked, so is the future mean when you're driving home, your car is going to tell you, hey, you're low on propane and it's Wednesday, so you like grilling steaks on Wednesday, so you should go get propane from this? I mean, I don't know. It's interesting. Okay. So we've learned that I have the Nest Thermostat. How many people are familiar with the Nest Thermostat? Okay. How many people have a Nest Thermostat? Okay. Just out of curiosity. If you're not familiar with it, this is probably one of the neater home automation devices that I played with. What it is it's a smart thermostat that most thermostats, you have to program when you want your heating or cooling to go on and off. What the Nest does is it learns your behavior and then will optimize your heating and cooling schedule based off of your behavior. And it can figure out when you're away from your home or when you're there. And so from there it kind of will build a schedule accordingly. My wife hated it. She called it HAL. But anyway, so because the Nest gathers so much, in the process of doing that, it gathers a lot of data about when someone is actually in their home, and thus it makes it a really great kind of stalking device. Now, it communicates kind of like all these other devices via, it talks to your home router, and then the router talks to a cloud server. So I was debating doing packet capture and trying to intercept communication between the thermostat and the router to see if we could get anything from there. But most of these devices are pretty good about encrypting their what they send and what they receive. So I didn't really feel like there was much of a point in that, though I may keep messing with this. I may keep doing that. But the interesting data is all in the Nest cloud servers anyway. So the first thing we want to, so Nest, like all these devices, has an API. I realized I forgot to put the address in there. It's like developers.nest.com. Nest API does not require any kind of authentication keys. It just uses your username and password to access the data. And there are a few different, there's a Python library. It's called like PyNest or Python-Nest or something like that. It's on PyPy. So if you just import that, download that and import that, you can you can access this data pretty easily. So the first thing that that I wanted to look at, that I got out of this, was the network information. So the Nest will tell you a decent amount of information about the network that it is actually using to communicate with the outside world here. And so the first thing you might notice here is this guy right here, the WAN IP. From this, what we can do is we can learn about the target's network, their network connection. And I used this site aaron.net, and you can see, or you can just put in an IP there, and it will tell you who owns the IP block that that this IP comes from, and so from that we learned that the target used to use Comcast as their ISP. Again, all of these things may seem like trivial little details, but if you're investigating a target, any little detail like this can be very useful. So we learned that it was Comcast. Now you can also get geolocational information from this. So I just picked this site, the iplocation.net, and from that you can see that yes, in fact, I do live in Pikesville, Maryland, and again have Comcast as my ISP. Now this IP address would also could potentially be very useful if you wanted to like mess with somebody, because you could then like try pinging the router or try to see what, if the router has any vulnerabilities or anything like that. Don't do that. Okay. So again, what we've learned thus far, we've learned that I use Comcast. We learned that I live in Pikesville, Maryland. We've learned other devices that I have, and so forth. Okay, so what really got me interested in doing this kind of this experiment was I wanted to see what you could learn about a target's pattern of life based on these devices. So what I did was I wrote a script that would ping the Nest every 5 minutes, and I let it run for about like 2 months or so. Now, my old house doesn't have central AC, so kind of once we hit air conditioning season, it just shuts off, and there's little point in going further than that. So I basically ran it from about beginning of March till, I don't know, end of April. And anyway, so what we can gather from that is, as I mentioned before, the Nest will tell you when the owner is away or when they're there, and it also will record any time somebody physically goes up to the device and adjusts it, or if they adjust it via like a mobile app or something like that, or the website. So what you see here, you can see first off, so this is an event, which means like someone went up to this and physically did something to it. And so you can see, first off, we have a timestamp of when that happened. We have an ID, this is telling you like what kind of device actually did it. And then, because then you have the obvious stuff like what is the temperature, did it go up, and then, and that. So what we can learn from this, if we aggregate this over time, is we can see what other devices are actually interacting with the Nest. And you can see here that most of the interactions come from the Wink, and the other portion come from my iPhone and my iPad. So we just learned 2 other pieces of information there that are of potential use. That I have an iPhone and that I have an iPad. Again, all these little things seem trivial, but when you start adding all this stuff up, it really starts making a big difference. Now, when you have the timestamps from this, you could also start to see there are patterns that might emerge about when the device is being changed by the Wink and when it's being touched by the phone. And the reason for that is my wife used the Wink app, whereas I use my phone to mess with it. But you would see that because the Wink apps, it becomes very obvious when you start looking at it, because the Wink app modifications occur mostly during the day when I'm not home, and the other ones occurred more in the evening when I was home. So again, we've learned that I have that, and it's over. Okay. So that's that. Now, when we start aggregating all of this data, yeah, sir. I'm sorry? Thank you. Yes, we could also learn my name if you didn't know it already. That is very true. Now, when you start collecting this data, you can also start building a pattern of when the house is like, when someone is in the house. The Nest collects, it has 3 different fields to tell you whether or not someone is there. It has just plain old away, the auto away, which is when it senses that there's no activity in the home, and then the manual away, which is like if you're going on vacation, you can go out, walk up to it and just turn it off and just tell it you're going on vacation. And so, again, I wrote this script that just would ping it every 5 minutes and just let it run for a while. And so it gets data that just essentially looks like this. There's a lot more data that was collected, but when you extract the events, you can see you have the timestamps and then the away status. And if you start to aggregate this, what you see is you can start pulling out lengths of time when the target is not there, and you can see so this is just showing you like on the 19th from 9 in the morning till, okay, so this looks like I left and we were gone most of the day, but you can just start to see the amount of time that nobody was home. And then if you start averaging that out, you could start to see patterns in when the house is most likely to be unoccupied. Yeah. That is, so this, I gathered this just from, again, my own pinging it. I would suspect that they are. I don't have any reason I don't know that. Their terms of service do say that you're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to aggregate it for like, I think for like commercial apps or things like that, you're not supposed to like build histories like this, but I would assume that they're doing this. The terms of service say, I think, 10 days, but I don't know. So if you aggregate this, if you draw this out and if you break it out by days of the week, again, you can start to see patterns of what time of day the house is least likely or most likely to be occupied based on the day and time. So if you wanted to rob me or something like that, you could probably figure that, like when the best time of day would be to do that. Don't do that, please.
He's not home now.
Yeah. Okay. So so here I'm going to introduce a little bit of cheating. So the next device I'm going to talk about is the automatic car dongle. How many people have heard of this? Okay. I saved the scariest for last. I bought this because it was advertised as something that you could set it up so like when you leave a certain radius, it would turn off your thermostat, and then when you come back, it would turn on your heat. And I thought it would be an interesting way of actually building up more accurate pattern of life data. So I wanted to see if that actually worked, but it didn't really do that very well. So from their website, if you're not familiar with this is what they claim that the automatic does. What it is it's a little device that you put into the onboard diagnostic port of your car, and it can read all the information from your car's onboard diagnostic computer, and then it can do all sorts of stuff with that. And then in theory, it can tell you, if you're driving crazy or if you crash into something or things like that. And again, what got me interested in this was the interaction they advertised between the Nest. It also will interact with a site called If This Then That, IFTT. Does anyone use IFTT? Okay, that's a really cool website. Kudos to them. And then it also finally will interact with Concur. So if you take business trips, you can like mark it in Concur. You can mark it as a business trip, and it can just dump it into your Concur account, and then you can fill out your expense reports and so forth. So it seems kind of cool. I don't know. Anyway. But what got me interested in it was the theoretical interaction between Nest and the automatic. In reality, what happens is that if you use this without using if this then that, what happens is every time you go outside of a radius, it sends you a text message and asks you, do you want to turn your heat off? And that just seems like a monumentally bad idea to be like driving, yes, I want to turn my heat off. And you have to reply to it in text message. So it was kind of a disappointment there. But it actually gathered a lot of really interesting yet really scary data, and which I'm going to show you right now. So the automatic does not have any kind of connection on board. It uses Bluetooth to communicate with your phone, and then your phone obviously just uses whatever kind of broadband connection you have to communicate with automatic servers. I contemplated trying to do some sort of packet capture right at this, between the automatic and the phone, but driving around trying to do that seemed like a really bad idea, so I opted not to. Their API is available here. You also need to have, this one uses Open Authentication 2, and you will need to request keys in order to access it. And they actually ask for a justification, so or some sort of reason why you want to access their API. So, you have to tell them something. There's a PHP library. I think we also found a Python library that will make the API calls. So it's pretty. If you're not comfortable doing that, it makes that pretty easy. So okay. And sorry, one other thing, they post examples and they post code snippets in Ruby on their website. So if you're more comfortable with Ruby, you can see the examples there. Okay, so the automatic. The first thing we can learn from it, you can ask it what vehicles are in your automatic account, and so from that we learn that I have a Mazda 3. It's from 2010. You can see what color it is, and when it was added. I think this is actually just when I bought the device and put it in there, and you can see fuel usage. Now, in this, what's really interesting here as terms of useful information is this VIN. The vehicle identification number, you can use this to, if you want to buy a Carfax report, you can then get all the person's whole accident history or the car's history. There are some other open source websites where you can actually do searches on VINs, and you can find out the car's whole ownership history and all this other stuff for free. The ones I've seen don't work all that reliably, and it didn't work for mine. Otherwise, I would have showed it to you. But in any event, that's a very valuable piece of information, is a VIN. And so, if you again, looking at this count, we would learn that I have a 2010 Mazda 3 and a 2005 Honda Odyssey. And if you were to do the same thing I did with the Nest, where you just ping it maybe perhaps every week, you could find changes in that. And so you would learn on a sad day in June, we replaced my Hyundai Santa Fe with a minivan. Yeah. Okay. So now, if you want to get at this data, I mentioned before you have to ask them for these authentication keys, and you have to come up with a reason why you want it. Now, if this then that actually gives you a great way of bypassing that whole thing and building a spreadsheet of all of your travels automatically. So if this and that has a number of, they call them recipes, and one of them is, what happens is every time you complete a trip, it will add an entry to a spreadsheet containing all the pertinent information about that trip. And we'll show you some of that stuff. And unfortunately, it's only protected by a username and password, which I believe in this case is also an email address and a password. So the data that you can get out of that, among other things, it has when trips started and stopped, the lat longs of when you left, the point of origination and the destination. It has the actual path that you took in there and how long it took, and then of course what vehicle you used. Now, from this, you can really, this is probably the most invasive device that I saw in terms of what you can actually learn from it. You can calculate a target's complete pattern of life, assuming they use a car, of course, just based off of when they get in the car, when they drive somewhere, when they, and then when they come home, when when you have those the lat long pairs, you can run them through a geocoder, and you can actually get addresses, and then from there you could figure out, they go to a shopping mall. Okay, well, you could figure out, you could conclude, they're going to a grocery store or things like that. It becomes very simple to do that thing. And again, this is the thing that I really did not want to just put on the internet and for posterity, so this is where you're just gonna have to trust me on this one. But it becomes very easy to do that. Just showing you some other things that I pulled out of this. You can see this is just calculating the number of trips I made per weekday, and what immediately jumps out at you is right here. There's very little activity on Saturday. And, well, all right. I'm guessing the chuckles came from the people who have seen The Big Lebowski. So anyway, those little things, it's an interesting detail. From that, you could also pick up, like, if somebody goes to a church every Sunday, or if somebody, I don't know, goes wherever on a particular day, it would become very easy to find those kinds of patterns in that data. You can also, so another recipe that is in If This Then That uses the automatic are the trip image. And so what it can do is, upon completion of every trip, it can actually send you a map like this of the trip that you made. And so if you overlay them, you can start to see variations on it. Like you can see right here, this trip, I took a slightly different route up here, probably because there was traffic, but you can just see, like, these two are identical. It looks like I took the 195 there, but you can really start getting a really scary insight into someone's daily life. It also has this path field, which when I saw that, I thought, okay, that has to be something good. Right? And what this is, this took me a little while to figure out, but what this is uses an encoding technique which Google uses called polyline. And what this actually is this is an array of lat longs, and you can decode that, and it will give you this. And so this translates to this. This is, I don't know if anyone's been to Baltimore before, but this is the 295, and this is getting on the Beltway. And so you can see these are all the points that correspond to that. And this comes from one of those path data points. So from this, when you start, again, if you were to start aggregating this over time, you could get a frighteningly accurate picture of pretty much where I am at any given point in the day. You could figure out, like if you really wanted to stalk someone, you could do some really scary stuff with this. And you know what time what time, like, would be an average departure time, how long it took. You can see the distances between points there. It really starts to get, there's an enormous amount of data in there, and I'm sure you can see that. So where is all this going? I kind of started to ask myself, in seeing all this, what does this mean for kind of an average person? And what's kind of keeping this data at bay, if you will? Well, all these companies do have privacy policies, and here are some samples of what is in them. And you can see, first off, they're pretty dense, and it can be kind of difficult to understand what they actually can do with this data. And I guess what I would say is, what I kind of got out of this is, I feel like with the proliferation of connected home automation devices, I think consumers kind of need to understand that their relationship with these devices is going to fundamentally change. In the past, if you bought a scale that talked to you, it was just going to talk to you. It wasn't going to tell everybody else or some company somewhere how much you weigh. That is no longer the case. Now, all these devices really double as a way of building big data sets for further analysis. And so I think part of that is that companies should craft, and this is just, again, my opinion on this, should craft understandable usage policies and end user agreements so that people can understand it without having to read through like 30 pages of dense legal text to get at what it is that they do. It reminded me of like credit card agreements. Excuse me. In like the last maybe 5 years, I've noticed that credit cards, I think the government mandated that they produce agreements that, it's just a very simple table that would say like interest rate, such and such, payment grace period, so many days. So it becomes relatively easy for people to understand. So I think what might help is if privacy policies or data policies ended up looking something like this, where it is more clear so that someone can understand it, even a non-technical person. I was showing this to someone in the speaker's lounge, and they said that pretty soon these devices are going to have a creepiness factor associated with them. But as we can become more and more accustomed to them, there's going to be creep, in that these devices are going to get creepier and creepier, and they're going to be, we're just going to become more and more accustomed to that. So with that, I want to leave a few minutes for questions. So thank you very much for. It looks like most everyone stayed awake and no one bolted for the door. So are there any questions? Sir.
Products are starting to kind of lean towards having this in everything, like automobiles, for example. Are they all going to have something like this in the near future?
It does seem to be heading that way. I mean, the GM cars have the OnStar system that collects. Oh dear. That collects all kinds of data about about where the person's going. I mean, it certainly does seem that way. Also, a lot of insurance companies are now giving people the option of putting an automatic like device in your car, and in exchange for doing that and letting them track you, they give you a lower rate. So I mean, customers need to decide, is that worth it? Is it worth saving a few dollars to have your whole life kind of put on display like that? Ma'am. Have I seen other uses of this data? I haven't seen. I don't think nothing's coming to mind. I know that in like some of the automatics literature, they talk about how they might be doing things like partnering with tire companies to to give people discounts like that. I'm honestly surprised we haven't. I suspect it's coming. Sir. Sure. The dongle costs $100, I think. You can find it. You can probably find it for $80 online. They just released a second generation version of it, and you want the second generation because it can actually do like real time streaming of your car's engine data. So if you're really into that sort of thing, you can see how much fuel you're consuming in real time. It's kind of cool. Yeah. Sorry. I haven't messed with that yet. I also got the Ring doorbell, which is another really neat device. If you haven't seen it, when you ring the doorbell, it will send it has a camera in it, and it will send the video feed to your phone, so you can tell solicitors to go away and not be there, and they just actually activated it with the Wink system, so you can make it so it can activate the sprinklers or something like that if someone you don't like is there. Sir. If they hadn't provided the keys, probably, well, not as much. The Nest was available, the automatic was available. Some of it you can get at through the Wink, if this then that, you can get at some of that data that way. I wasn't really trying to break into them. I have a colleague who we were kind of debating doing that. You can also actually route the Nest. You could probably get some of it by okay. I'm hypothesizing here. If you wanted to intercept the network traffic that was going outbound, you could probably get at it that way. Sir.
How did you isolate your use example versus a plethora of other things that you've been coming in, or did you only have access?
So when you use the API key, you only have access to one user account. So it's just your own. If you wanted to look at everyone, Wink would have to be doing that. Yeah, of course.
If that's the case, and that the access to all this tricky information is owned by you, and it's authenticated, that you only had access because it was owned by you, if you stay within that guidelines, would you have a concern?
I guess my concern is, I don't know that it's a concern. I guess my feeling is that people should just be aware of kind of what's possible, and that I did this kind of to show what I could figure out with my own, but the companies that own this data, or that own the systems that store this data, they could be doing this or not, or they could be selling this data or not, or I mean, by virtue of the fact that this data exists, something can happen with it, and as we've seen, in even the most secure data gets leaked, or so the fact that it's there it kind of lends itself. Something will happen with it eventually, for good or for otherwise. Sir.
When you were pinging every 5 minutes,
yeah.
in the API, did you get a sense
I didn't look at it. I mean, I'm sure I could with the timestamps. And I mean, I think I'm pretty sure that's almost instantaneous. Yeah. How did I get that? It was from the Nest. The Nest API will provide that for you if you ask it for the network information. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so there was some other case study I read recently about like a lot of railways in Asia using MAC addresses of your cell phone to measure the crowd, like how much is the traffic. They would change the train frequencies based on that. There are positive uses of this.
Oh, of course. Of course, yeah. I don't think that it's necessarily a bad thing, or I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. I think, well, ultimately it probably is a good thing, because I think hopefully this data will be used for good purposes. I think, though, people should be aware of what's there, and people should start thinking about how it should be used rather than just how it can be used. How am I doing on time? One more, sir.
In any of your explorations, have you come across any APIs that are doing using techniques like generalization or suppression or other differential privacy techniques, or is everything really just almost log line level,
It's
like the typical example? Have you come across it anywhere with generalization or suppression or roll-ups?
what I've seen. So what it looked like to me was that most of the API access was intended to get information about an individual rather than roll-ups. So I didn't see any of that. Doesn't mean it's not out there, but in the products that I looked at, I didn't see it. Okay, so thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the conference.